The goal of this meeting, I've been to a number of them, is the connections in the room, obviously, is one important one, but we're also here to learn. And we want both practical as well as inspirational learning to come out of these sessions, and hence the great lineup that Warren and his team are able to produce year after year is sort of the essence of why we get such great attendance at these events. So we're going to do this one as a fireside chat as opposed to just a speaker up here speaking and answering questions. We have two folks here. Ed Breen is the marquee speaker, but he's here with a longtime associate of his who is going to work as basically as the moderator, Raj Gupta. And I'm going to say a little bit about their respective bios. The bio for Ed is in your program, and I don't want to repeat all that. But I think it's interesting, their interactions and some of the themes, particularly of Ed's career, that I suspect will come out in his remarks today. Ed's been in the field of industrial technology for his career. He's been at Motorola, General Instrument, and Tyco. I remember General Instrument pretty well. That was the first company that made the top set boxes that actually made cable television work. They became the market leader in this field under Ed's leadership, and the value of the business grew markedly during that time. And then he had the distinction of succeeding a very well-known name, Dennis Kozlowski, as head of Tyco subsequently, which has got to be a job that's right up there with being the head of the Partners Healthcare System in terms of the degree of difficulty. In that role, he brought the company back from very close to bankruptcy and from a terrible state of disorganization and demoralization, reestablishing respect for leadership, refurbishing and renewing the board of trustees, and creating a culture of integrity and performance. Interestingly, he also did something that's somewhat unusual from my perspective in the world of business, in that he divided up the company, split it up into six highly successful, highly valued subsidiaries, and in so doing, I think basically restored the health of multiple components of what had previously been a fairly dysfunctional conglomerate. I talked to him last week to get a little flavor of what he was going to say today. He did mention that as a reward for some of his success, he was given the infamous shower curtain at one point during his tenure, which must have been an interesting and maybe dubious distinction. So Ed is now, as you know, at the helm of DuPont. And DuPont is one of the great, famous American brand names in the industry and science and chemical world. And since he's been with the company, he has engineered a proposed merger with the other great company in this field, the Dow Chemical Company, which I assume will be the heart of what he's going to talk about. Let me say just a quick word about Raj Gupta. I actually was sent a bio that he had recently written. I'm sure he will autograph copies for people if you want to get a copy and have him autograph it and send it back to you. Very interesting book. Raj grew up in India. He trained as an engineer at the India Institute of Technology, the foremost technical training school in India. And he came to the U.S. basically as a young man to make his fortune. And fairly early on in his career, he found his way to a manufacturing company, Roman Haas, which is also in the chemical realm, makes components for a whole variety of things like paints and other important components of day-to-day life. And he basically rose through the ranks of that company over a 30-year career, spending the last 10 as CEO. And interestingly, at the conclusion of his career, his crowning achievement was he engineered the takeover of Roman Haas by the Dow Chemical Company, of all things. So during this time, he and Ed became acquainted. He was a board member at Tyco when Ed was CEO. I think they greatly enjoyed working together during that time. They now work also through a relationship to the advisory board of New Mountain Capital, where Raj is also a senior advisor. And they have a shared set of experiences, a shared set of perspectives. I think particularly some interesting philosophies, and I think you will greatly enjoy their interaction. So welcome, and look forward to hearing what you have to say, Ed and Raj.
Good afternoon, and really glad to be here. So this is a little different format than you're used to, so we'll make it conversational, and I hope you'll find it enjoyable. So Ed, my first question for you is, you have done a lot of great things and created a huge amount of value for the shareholders. But what made you move from being a board member of DuPont to CEO of DuPont, and you're doing this for the fourth time? General Instruments, Motorola, Tyco, and now DuPont. So what's behind this?
Well, if my wife were sitting up here, you'd get a very different answer because she asked me that question every week. But it was interesting. DuPont asked me to join the board. They were, as many of you would know, were in a little bit of a crisis of their own. Nothing to the extent of Tyco, by the way. But, they had a proxy fight going on, asked me if I would join to help out. And so I started going around visiting all the major investors, and I see some of you in the room here today that I visited with. And it was one of those things, I guess I could say, I started to slowly fall in love with it. And I really thought there was a great opportunity at DuPont to really accelerate the growth of the company, the value of the company, and all that. So I just started to get excited. Like, I think there's a lot that can be done here. And, like some of the opening comments, it's an incredible company. It's the oldest company in America. It's 213 years old. And the innovation machine at that company at DuPont is incredible. So I really got excited by that. And I just saw about 4 or 5 paths where I thought we could really help the company out, accelerate its growth, and really create a lot of value for our shareholders. So I kind of decided I was going to suit up again and do it one more time.
So a little anecdote I'll add here, when we were in the Tyco board, he had actually ex-CEOs of DuPont, Dow, ICI, and I was the active CEO of Roman Haas. 4 chemical companies CEOs on his board. So I think he's very well trained and also really somebody who was absolutely a pleasure to work with as well. And as you'll get a sense of this, but it's pretty unique. So Ed, you're really known for both taking on turnaround situations in various industries, and I would say is thinking about value creation in a step change way rather than an incremental way. And so what do you think are some of the key things in terms of priorities for the board and the CEO when you're trying to create long-term sustainable value?
Yeah, well, Raj, I think the comment you just ended with there, it's all about long-term shareholder value. And I just feel like I'm maniacal about that with any board I've been involved in. Not short-term stuff, razzle-dazzle, none of that. How are we going to create value and look back 10 years later and say we really did something very significant? And by the way, I net it down to 4 things. If a board does these 4 things well, I think you've got a great functioning board and you'll make a lot of progress. It's tone at the top. Does the board have the right CEO and management? That's critical. Do you have the right strategy that you agree with management on? And are you managing risk? And risk is way more up the ladder now than I would have said it was even 10, 15 years ago. Risk actually ends up being part of your strategy. In many cases, it develops from risk that creates your strategy and opportunity. So you've got to get those 4 things right.
So I think one of the things, just a little math I did before I came here. So if we had invested with Ed Breen in 1997 at General Instrument to today, what do you think the $10,000 is worth? It's over $1.2 million. That's 120-fold return over this 20-year period, which I'm sure far exceeds even what Warren Buffett has done. So I think what you'll get a sense from Ed today is what it takes to really think about long-term sustainable value. So Ed, just moving on, talk about a little bit about what the board, how do the board and the CEO set the tone at the top?
Well, it was interesting. By the way, Tyco was a very obviously drastic situation at the time, so we did things that were more draconian than you would normally do. But I remember doing my first town hall at Tyco, and a woman stood up and said, "I'm embarrassed to wear my Tyco T-shirt to my daughter's soccer game," and it just resonated with me. Oh my gosh, this company is really in trouble because there was no heart and soul in the company. And, I think it's the only time it ever been done. I asked the whole board who just hired me if they would all step down together off the board. And we created a new board in the company. And it took us 3 or 4 months, Raj, as you'll remember, and the board all stepped down. And we brought a whole new board on. And then unfortunately, maybe or fortunately, I asked 290 of the top 300 executives to leave the company, mostly in the corporate office because I didn't trust anyone at that point because of what had happened. So we had an instant, wow, this is a new company, it's a new day, it's new people. A lot of us were known people because we had done it before. But I thought the most important thing we did, and I still do this to this day, everyone grades their management employees on getting results. And I think that's only half the equation. I think it's results plus behavior. And so what we did at Tyco, and this started at the board, by the way, we said, when we sit down and I do a management or a review once a year, twice a year with an employee, here's how you did on results and the behaviors. And our 4 core values are what we grade people on: integrity, excellence, teamwork, and accountability. And we literally sit there and talk to every employee. We permeated through the whole company. And boy, did that change the culture. It took a few years, but everyone understood what we meant. And I'll just give you one. Teamwork is critical in a company, and a lot of people like politics and talking behind people's backs, and I don't want any of that. And you will get graded on that because you're going to be a team player or you're just not part of this company. And so I think adding the behaviors part and permeating that down through the company was huge.
I mean, I certainly witnessed it firsthand, just dealing with the management team at different levels, and as a board member, which Ed Breen and Jack Kroll promoted for the directors to go in front of the audience without their being present, without the management present, and interact with people, have a town hall to really hear from grounds up as to what the values meant in practice. It was pretty unique for its time. In my experience, Ed, the relationship between the board and the management and CEO really varies a great deal from company to company and the style of the CEO. How do you create the right kind of relationship between the CEO, management, and the board? What do you think are some of the keys?
Yeah, look, that's very critical, and that goes to my point about tone at the top's number one, and then do you have the right CEO and management team? So that the board's got to get that right, because you can list 100 companies to me, and I'll say average CEO, great CEO, and you go look at the results. Yeah, we all know it if you know people that run these companies. So you got to have the right person in the seat or things aren't going to work. I think I've watched boards at varying levels do this. Some are good, some aren't. But you got to be brutally honest and open about everything. When I talk about risk, you can't hide anything. Risks are hitting all our companies, and you've got to be able to deal with it. So the way I've dealt with it over the years, and I learned this from somebody else, but I think it was one of the best techniques I ever had, was I start my board meetings, and Raj, we did this at Tyco. I just had my board meeting with DuPont yesterday. I start out and spend the first hour with just me and the board. And the 1 hour session is basically, if you wake Ed Breen up in the middle of the night and ask him what he's worried about, tell us. And I sit there and regurgitate everything I'm worrying about, what I'm thinking about, strategy-wise, risks in the company. And I literally just open kimono and I tell them everything. And it's actually kind of cathartic. It's literally the board members want to walk up to you afterward and actually give you a hug. I'm like, I didn't realize you were worrying about so much. And so it's so open and transparent that they kind of know everything. And I just think it starts, and by the way, some of the stuff I talk about during the first hour, there's going to be presentations during the day, and they're going to hear it again in more detail, but it's just a chance for them to ask me questions, really, really dig into it. And I just think we all have our own practices. That's my practice, and I think it's really served the board well, and me well.
No question about it. In fact, every board I've served on, I've taken that practice and applied there. And as you say, it's cathartic, but it's also very informative. And it's done in a way that total openness, total transparency, and I think it works very well. One of the practice I know that we instituted at Tyco and other places is board having a couple of 3 objectives every year, in addition to doing the normal things. And I think that's a good way for board to assess itself as to how they're doing. How do you ensure that the board is getting it done in terms of strategy? You said, strategy is now becoming a very key component of what the board's responsibility is.
Yeah, first of all, boards better spend a lot of time on strategy. And since Sarbanes-Oxley, which I'm not opposed to, and all the stuff you got to check the box on, you got to be careful. I make sure every board meeting there's a couple hours laid out just talking about strategy. So we know we have the time, and we're going to really spend the time on it. And I do phone calls, as you know, between board meetings, and usually that 1 hour phone call is about strategy, something going on. So the board's up to speed by the time they get to the board meeting. We're not starting everything from the start line. But the key is, and this is what I always talk about when I do these private sessions and all, it's not just creating value. I don't want to run a company that can't create significant value. I think every company can make a leap, a significant leap. And that's what I always talk to the board about. That's that long-term shareholder value. By the way, the great example, I had 2 I was fortunate, General Instrument and Tyco. But I remember Tyco, when I introduced Raj to the board, I wanted to split the company into 6 different companies. The board looked at me like I was crazy. We had saved the company, we were growing, we had it fixed. The stock was probably up 300% at that point in time. Everyone's feeling great. And I kept just saying to myself, this is not the right path to get to the real promised land. And, I remember saying to the board, look, I think the stock's going to probably double again. We'll maybe get it up 500-600% in total. But I think we can get it up over 1,000%. And I said, the way we're going to get there is split the company up. And by the way, one of the biggest ones was here in Boston. And thank heavens we headquartered it here in this community, was Covidien. I used to always want a home run hit at your stadium because Covidien was on the Green Monster. It felt so good. And, it just unleashed so much entrepreneurial spirit in the companies and all. And all 6 companies obviously did extremely well. And, so we were thinking, what's not an okay path? What's the best path to get us there? And we always talk to the board about it. It probably took us a year to convince the Tyco board that, I guess maybe we're not crazy. We should do this. And we did it.
No, I think you're absolutely right, because I participated in all those discussions. The very first meeting was about half the board saying, well, let's study this. The other half saying, why are we doing this? To really getting all the external input, management's best expertise and ideas, and having a thorough discussion. And you're right, I think it took us about 9 months or a year of multiple discussions to come to the conclusion that that was the right future for each of the businesses to be more focused and be able to invest in the space that they invested in and do the thing they needed to do.
Yeah, and it was interesting. It didn't suit me well because I was working my way out of a job.
Yeah.
So it was sort of like, it was fun running this big conglomerate. And I'm like, I guess I'm not going to have a job when this is done. But it was the right thing to do. And so we did it.
So I think the other one you mentioned, that risk now is almost becoming at a higher level priority for the board, given the rapid changes that are taking place and what technology is driving. So how does board and the management kind of deal with this risk?
Yeah, I'm really big on this risk thing, and I present it to the board twice a year. We do a whole study in the company from divisions and then at corporate, and put it together and put the top 10 risks that the company is facing. And we talk to the board about each one of them, what we're doing to mitigate it. But here again, you got to be brutally honest about it, because you got to put the real things on there. It's not, a recession could happen and we won't grow. And that's, forget that stuff. What could really, I always said to the management team, what torpedo could hit the ship and sink us? That's the risk I want to talk about. And so we talk to the board all the time. And risk ties closely to strategy, because I've made more big decisions because of a risk than I did because it was just a proactive strategy. And in my career, I'll tell you, when I ran General Instrument, we had this little company. We grew it into something very, very significant. We did have 70% of the set-top box market. I always like looking at people's TVs when I walk in their house because it felt so good. And we were growing like a weed. Our market value was shooting up. And I went to the board and I said, within about 5 years, this product is going to get commoditized. And I said, nobody knows it, but we know it. And I said, that's a problem. So we either got to divert path or do something else. And that led to when Motorola offered to buy the company for $18 billion, which back then was the largest technology deal done. That's back a ways, almost 20 years. The board had no issue whatsoever. We had debated this risk so much, they were like, my gosh, we just hit a grand slam. And so they were so up to speed on everything. And I'll give you the Covidien example again. It was such a great one. We wanted to add to Covidien. It was going to be, I thought, our most valuable company, but we needed to do acquisitions. And we had a multiple on our stock, a good multiple, but we were an industrial multiple, 16 times, 17 times. Covidien should have had a 22, 23 multiple. We couldn't buy companies with stock. And we wanted to buy some where you couldn't use all cash. And that was a dilemma. And that was a risk to the health of our biggest, what I thought was going to be our biggest division. That was laid into the strategy, as you know, of, well, maybe we ought to split this thing up and let Covidien have its own capital structure, its own multiple. And by the way, Covidien, as you all, if you followed it, started doing acquisitions, took their R&D spending up, and we just sold it, I don't know, last year to Medtronic for $50 billion.
I mean, the other side of this was TE connectivity, where the electronics industry was moving to Asia, needed a lot of restructuring and investment, and as an independent company has done exceptionally well. Had it been part of a conglomerate, it wouldn't have gone to where it did and how well it's done. So I think one of the, you have managed and led companies in different industries, but most of them have had technology at the base of it. What are the things that are important when you are leading a company that is science and engineering? What are the things that you watch out for or you focus on?
Yeah, well, this is a big thing at DuPont because the heart of the company it's an innovation machine and it's unbelievable. But things are changing so rapidly. That also goes back to my risk comment. You know how many industries are getting disaggregated right now, and it's happening in every company. So you got to be really transparent about that. But when it comes to the innovation piece, I always, in the companies I ran, and DuPont is supercharged this way, the most important thing is live with your customer. DuPont's, one of its biggest strengths people don't realize is its application engineer. We literally live with our major customers. And the question is, what problem do you have? Or what problem would you like to solve? And so we're like hand in glove with these customers. We're in food, we're in the carpet you're walking on, we're in every car, but we're fixing problems that they don't know how to fix. And that's how you're successful, and you're going to have a high hit rate on your R&D. We're literally solving their problem. We're not just sitting around saying, oh, we could invent something here. So I always find application engineering, if you have a strength there when you're an R&D machine, that's huge. When I was in the cable business, I personally live with the top 10, 15 cable operators in the country who I'm now on the board of Comcast, which is the biggest. But I knew, we knew what they wanted. And that's really helped us develop a lot of our products. I'd say the other thing, and this is really true at DuPont, close relationships with universities. We have to get the best chemical engineers. So we've got to be critically tied to the right universities. And we do a lot of research work with universities. We get a lot of our technology from universities. In fact, you've all been reading in the last 6 months about CRISPR-Cas, gene editing. DuPont is right in the middle of it, and we have as many patents as anybody. And what a game changer. By the way, that's going to disaggregate our agriculture company in DuPont. And thank heavens we're in the middle of it, because we would probably have an issue because it's going to change the way you innovate in that industry. And as you know, in many industries as we go forward. We should probably
just as you say, you always think about not incremental change or steady as it goes, but think about step change in the value creation over long term. How do you see that playing out in this DuPont Dow merger?
Well, so I looked at it when I was a board member, and there was kind of 4 things in my mind when I thought, boy, we could really accelerate this company. One was I thought we could improve the organic growth rate of the company with some things I had in my mind. I won't bore you with that now, it'll take too long. Secondly, I thought the company needed to streamline its G&A structure. Unfortunately, that was painful. We took $1 billion of cost out of the system. The company's running better because of it. We also restructured the way we run it, so we did that. But what the big prize in my mind was, wow, if we could merge with Dow, and we're going to merge with them, and then we're going to separate 18 months later, and instead of separating back into two, we're going to separate into three companies: a material science company, an agriculture company, one of the bigger ones in the world, and a specialty company, which will have some of Raj's old businesses in it, actually. And I think that's a better way to organize it. It's going to create more value. They're each going to have the right balance sheet for their businesses so they can grow and do their thing. And we're going to set them up with a great capital structure and just move on. And I think it'll be good. And by the way, I'm not a 1 year guy. I think long term, but our stock's up 60% since we did all this from a year ago. So I think the marketplace and some of you investors in the room are like, I think it's a pretty good strategy. Now there's a lot to execute in the next 2 years, but I think there's going to be really three great companies come out of this.
I agree with that. What do you think, Ed, with these big changes that are taking place in the current environment, whether it's geopolitical or economic? What is the expectation, the priority should be for a business leader today?
Well, look, the world is different than when I first was a CEO 20 some years ago. I mean, it's just the pace is faster, change is faster. I think there's more risks hitting all of us. So back to my comment, being really open about what they are and how you're going to deal with them. Every CEO you talk to says, I'm worried about, it's usually because of the Internet of Things. Something's changing their business model. And by the way, it might be, much of it can be very helpful and the right thing. As I said, CRISPR-Cas technology is going to change the whole ag industry. 5 years ago, not too many people would even have thought of that. And if you weren't on top of it, you would have never seen that. So the pace is very different. I'd say the other thing, the relationship with investors is very different. Everyone always asks me about the activist thing because we had an activist, and still do, by the way, in DuPont. I think every investor's become an activist nowadays. They're very strong, opinionated. By the way, they'll team up with activists, maybe quietly. So I view them all as very active, and I think that's very different than 15 years ago. And I don't think that's a bad thing either. You have to be out there today if you're running a company public. You have to be out there talking to your investor base, and their input is very valuable. There's 10 people own half your stock.
Yeah, that's a remarkable change. The concentration of ownership today, top 20 institutions probably own between 50 to 75% of every major corporation in the United States today. And they're not silent, including the index funds, which I can speak for being with the Vanguard board for 15, 16 years. They are really setting the tone in terms of what's important for governance.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. So, but I think let's open this up for some questions from the group here. Please.
So, pivoting off of your comment about how you start boarding with the board, what is keeping you awake?
Well, I'll tell you, when I first got to DuPont, what was keeping me awake, but we actually did the deal really fast, was trying to get it done. I mean, it's interesting, and I always say in my whole career, and this goes back to playing long ball and creating shareholder value for the long term, I think I've counted up, I've made 12 what I consider major decisions that were, I wouldn't say make or break, but close to, you had to get them right. They were really big swings. And doing the Dow-DuPont merger, I'd put on my list of 12. That would go on there. That's the one since I've been at DuPont. So it was that, and I'd say that the thing that kind of keeps me awake at night is just the whole issue. I mean, we are putting two big companies together, and then we're going to immediately reorganize them into three divisions the way we're going to separate them later. So we've got people movement, and remember, there are going to be three public companies. So the amount of people we're moving around and getting positioned to go into jobs right now, it's not as bad as my Tyco thing when I got rid of the top 290 people, because that was pretty brutal. Like, it was hard to run the company for a while, but that's that's my biggest worry right now is, can we get all that done in the next 6 months, get it organized, and without skipping a beat. Our performance this year has been really solid, and Dow's performance has been really solid, so I don't want to skip a beat while we go through that process. That would be my big one. Yeah.
I guess we can't let you escape without a comment on how you see the national picture potentially impacting you. I guess you're not worried about it, right?
Well, no, I'm actually not. But I say, look, some of the things we're hearing right now, if they happen, I'm all for them. So, obviously, tax reform would be huge, and I think this country on the corporate, forget the individual, which I think needs to be done too, but on the corporate side, we're uncompetitive with our tax rate, and it's just a shame to watch. And every company has their operations set up so they can, get their tax rate down as low as they can, and we just need to clean it up and get on with it. Get a tax rate that's competitive with the rest of the world. So I think that's huge for every business. I think, again, I don't know if it'll happen, but if we could repatriate the $3 to $4 trillion that's sitting overseas in all of our bank accounts, I think the influx, I mean, think of it, our national debt's around 20 trillion and there's 3 to 4 just sitting, not in the US doing anything. So if we could bring that back, I think what that would unleash would be unbelievable. So I think that's another big one I'd like to see, and it sounds like, that's being talked about now. So, that's just a couple of them I think would be enormous.
Infrastructure spending.
Yeah, if that happens, be good. That'd be good for DuPont too, by the way, with what we do. So yeah, and I think everyone's feeling a little more bullish right this minute. But this stuff has to get through.
How do you balance, maybe Ed, I'll ask you, is when you make these big decisions and the risk, what sort of things you rely on? I mean, you have tremendous intuition and the great experience, obviously it's important. But what are the things that you look for when you're making those 12 important decisions that you made, or the most recent one?
Well, I never make them fast. It might seem like they're fast, but I'm very, I think I think things through for quite a while, and I try to get the advice of everyone I can get it from. In confidence, obviously, because they're under big things. You're usually under an NDA or something. So, I just try to get input from every angle. And the way I always looked at it when I make a really big decision is, what's my worst case scenario and can I live with it? Because, again, that's that torpedo hitting the ship. You don't want the ship to actually sink. So a lot of CEOs, I think, just worry about making big, tough decisions because, why do it? I don't need to. I'm just run my company. So what if it could be a little better? You sort of don't want to take the chance. And I've just never looked at that. I just don't want to work and do something I love and not go for it. But I've never made a big decision I didn't study from every angle. I take my time, and I always try to think, what's my worst case scenario? Can I deal with my worst case scenario if by chance that happens? And you protect yourself that way. Did you have a question?
A number of years ago, I had a chance of hearing your. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
A number of years ago, I had a chance to hear your compliance officer, the one you hired, I forget his name.
Eric Pillmore.
Exactly, at an event. And he said that the first thing he did was he had lunch with all of the admins because they were essentially running the company at that point. And a decision for him was, would he be willing to tell his wife what happened at work today? What are some things, we hear this so often about, do the right thing, and then you have Wells Fargo. What are some things that CEOs and people should really know what's happening down deep so they can really move this situation forward and change that?
Yeah, I've given this so much thought because of the Tyco experience. And by the way, to that point, that was Eric Pillmore. He worked with me at GI, and I normally don't hire people from my old career. I just don't make a practice of it. But I remember I called Eric up, and we were going to have literally a vice president of compliance, which nobody had back then in a company like ours, an industrial company. He was the first person I hired. He's like, you got to be kidding, Ed. Do you want me to be the first hire? I'm like, yeah, I really needed it at Tyco. But, it goes back to, there's a couple angles to it. One is, if you don't drive your core values down through the company, and you're very open about it, you don't hear all the problems. I think if you have a very transparent organization, you talk the values, there's a lot of ways input gets back to you on what's going wrong in the company, whether it's the ombudsman line, whatever it is, you hear about problems in an open company. And I'm not going to use that example because that's a current company, but it was amazing when we started to infiltrate this through Tyco, how many people were raising their hands and say, well, I'm concerned about this, I don't think this is being done right. And that's one of the ways you can get kind of a closed loop system going, to really hear things and squash them before they become something significant. But you got to be very open, and you got to talk about it all the time in a company. Yeah.
So, you're in DuPont, which is 213 years old. So you're in DuPont, which is 213 years old. Obviously, it's undergone a lot of change in that 2+ centuries. You've been a change agent coming in from General Instruments to Tyco to DuPont now. You've changed CEOs, you've changed boards, you've changed senior management, you've changed strategy as you've done this. Someplace in there you must see, as you go into a company, the essence or the soul of what that company really represents. How do you determine that, and how do you make sure that lasts as you make all of these changes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And by the way, that was hugely on my mind when I was going to DuPont. It's a funny, by the way, I'm the first outsider to run DuPont in 213 years also. And I think I was probably, when I was announced and nobody even met me yet, I think that was a shock, huge shock to the system. Like, you got to be kidding me, an outsider's coming to DuPont? So it was a huge responsibility from that standpoint. And the one thing, you learn fast when you're in a company, kind of where the heart or the backbone of it is. DuPont, I always call it the heart. And a couple of the things that so impressed me, thank heavens, and it is the heart of DuPont, was innovation, incredible relationships, this application, and living with the customer. And you actually hear people talking about this stuff in the corporate office, which is rare in companies. Like, it's like on everybody's mind all the time. That's what they talk about. And so we've just had this critical relationship with customers, closer than most companies I've been at, by the way. So the sales force, incredibly important. The innovation machine, clearly the heart of the business. So what you do is you really promote that, you celebrate that. We have tons of wins. We've introduced about 600 products so far this year. I did a town hall in front of 18,000 people, most by video, by the way, the other week, and we celebrate the innovation. We use examples of some key ones. We use CRISPR-Cas, by the way, because it's a humongous invention, and you really, thrive on that part and really get the organization excited. And then when you go to make the tough changes like we did at the beginning of the year, you got to be really open and transparent. I just tried to lay it. I said, look, here's the problem, and I'm going to benchmark DuPont against the best companies. I don't want to be an average company. DuPont has been around 213 years. This is the way you want to be the best. We are going to be on the winning team. We're going to win the World Series. We're going to win the Super Bowl, and we can't do it with the cost structure we have. This is totally out of whack. I don't know how it got there. I don't care how it got there. We need to fix this. And I think when you're transparent and open with people, they might not like it, or they worry it could affect them, but they go, I get it. Like, I get it. That's a problem. But you need to present it and just be totally open. And anytime we have tough things like that, I just try to lay it on the line and say, here's the facts.
And the other one, I would say, safety has been such an important part of the DuPont legacy.
Yeah, it was amazing when I ran Tyco. And I don't mean it quite this way, but I had these 4 chemical guys on my board, and they'd always be quizzing me on we call it environmental health and safety at Tyco. And I'm like, man, this is like a big deal. And we spent a lot of time on it, and the employees loved it too, we actually did. When I got to DuPont, thank heavens, we were like that, because one of the cores of DuPont, we call it SHE there now, safety, health, environment. We are running some of the world's biggest chemical facilities. They're dangerous. And it's like one of the most critical things in the company. And so I not only do an operating review meeting once a month with every business to drill on the numbers and what's going on and why we off schedule, but once a month I actually do I'll call it an operating meeting on our sheet performance by business. I personally do it with the teams, just to send back to just to send the message, this is important. And even the CEO, and by the way, we have an environmental committee of the board that just yesterday went through the exact same thing I go through with the management team in a summary form. So it's known from the last person on the shop floor, they get this in our company. And that's how you drive things. Yep.
Two questions. At what tax rate would you consider repatriating your offshore cash back to the United States? And two, what do you think of the proliferation of corporate stock buybacks as a way of enhancing shareholder value or delivering value to shareholders? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think a tax rate anything 10% or below. I've heard the number bandied around recently with the administration change of 8.75%, 8.5%. But I would think 10% on down. I think you'd get a lot of it back. By the way, it's all free money at that point too to spend on infrastructure or whatever. So I think companies would love to bring it back. I do think, I don't know if you're trying to tie those two questions together, but the argument was, you'll just all buy your shares back. I don't think that'll happen. I think there will be, yes, there'll be a chunk that would buy shares back. I don't see what's wrong with that because your company's going to be more valuable. So I don't get what's wrong with that. But a chunk of it will get spent on new programs and things. I'm a big believer in share repurchases, but I'm not a lover of just consistently doing it all the time. I have done that from time to time, so for instance, when we were going to split up Tyco, I was like, nobody really gets what we're up to yet. It's like when we announced we're going to merge with DuPont too, nobody really got it right away. They get it, but they wait. I got time to buy the stock and all that. And so in Tyco, when we had made these decisions, stock was going up a little bit, but nothing crazy. I'm like, I'm going to buy back every share we can buy back. And if you go back and look at our history, we were buying billions back as quick as we could because we were highly confident we were going to create exponential value. And so that's the time to do it. But no, I am a proponent of share repurchase, and I've done it over the years pretty consistently.
Hello. Oops.
Yeah, I mean, this whole populist thing going on in the world is incredible. We had, Italy the other day, so just add that to the list of changes. But it doesn't overly worry me from running a business, and I don't think it is overly bothering the business community because I don't think it changes pretty much the growth rate in Europe. I don't see that it hurting or helping. Will it hurt the UK a little? Maybe, but the general picture in Europe is, 0 to 2% growth depending on what country you're talking about. The world, things seem better the last 30 days with the stock market going, but the world's a tough world out there. The global GDP is give or take 2%. It's hard to get double-digit earnings in a company. It's getting hard. The S&P 500 this year, if you add them all together, there's no earnings lift. There's nothing there. So these are pretty tough times right now, but I don't see Europe that changing with any of this going on. I just think it's still going to be a slog and very low growth environment for a while over there, but still great business.
So you mentioned earlier, risk profile is higher in the thinking of CEOs. They have to be worrying about risk out there. At the same time, you mentioned DuPont's innovative. You have an entrepreneurial spirit among your employees. Those two forces would pull most people in opposite directions. And so how do you reconcile those? How do you manage those organizationally at DuPont?
Yeah, well, we talk very openly about it. Now, I haven't been at DuPont, I don't think, long enough for it to be as ingrained this way, but you always, what's going to cannibalize your business? So it goes back to that risk. What could happen to you? And if something's going to cannibalize your business, you might as well be the one to cannibalize your own business. So when I ran General Instrument, let me give you that example. We were the world leader in set-top boxes, but it was analog technology. And we were pumping them out by the millions every month, and it was just a great business. And there was a lot more to GI, by the way, than set-top boxes, but it was just so overwhelming, the numbers. And the world was going digital. So there's the conflict right there. It was, at that time, that was our biggest risk. It was 1, 2, and 3. We talked to the board, every board meeting about it. And we flooded all our R&D over to that. I mean, we made so many drastic changes because the board got it. And we ended up being the winner in the digital war and ended up with 70% of the market. But we cannibalized ourselves. And if you weren't open and honest about the problem, you would have never been the one to fix it. And by the way, pre-me at Motorola, Motorola's problem, to give you the other, is they had the best analog phones in the world. You all had the flip phone from Motorola, the TAC, and all that. I mean, we had almost 50% of the global market in handsets. And they didn't rush to digital because it was going to cannibalize them. And Nokia ended up with 50% of the market. And now today, Apple has overtaken Nokia because of the next, basically, a software computing device. So you got to be brutal and open about those things because you might as well can't fix. If it's going somewhere, you're not going to stop it. And then why not jump on and try to be that person?
Wonderful. On behalf of Boston College, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.